Welcome to the Outthinkers podcast. Plug into fascinating minds and breakthrough ideas that are transforming industries and the world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank comprised of corporate strategists, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are shaping the future of business. If this describes you, join us at outthinker.com. Now, let's dive into this week's episode.
So Survive, Reset, Thrive is, the best way to describe it is a pragmatic and proactive model of how to grow through any market condition. And you've got to start with the premise that growth is a loop, not a line, which can sound a bit cliche, but unfortunately, most of our strategy planning tools are based on linear checklists or frameworks, step one, then step two, then step three. And that's not the dynamic and complex world we're living in. And so I'm encouraging strategy experts, whether you're an internal CSO or you're running your own company, to embrace this loop thinking.
That was Rebecca Homkes, a high growth strategy expert and CEO and executive advisor. She is a lecturer at London Business School, faculty at Duke Corporate Education, advisor and faculty at the Boston Consulting Group, focused on AI and digital transformation, and a former fellow at the London School of Economics Center for Economic Performance. A global keynote speaker and recognized thought leader, she is also the global faculty director of the active learning program with the Young Presidents Organization, or YPO. She leads several fintech accelerators and serves on the boards of many high growth companies. Rebecca's multifaceted roles give her a uniquely wide yet deep perspective on how companies grow. And what I love about her work is that it challenges us to realize that the mechanical, linear paradigm of strategy making that has dominated the field for the last 60 odd years cannot deliver sustained growth in today's volatile, rapid changing environment. She shares an alternative approach in her 2024 book, Survive, Reset, Thrive, Leading Breakthrough Growth Strategy in Volatile Times. In this conversation, we dive into some of her powerful techniques around arming your company with the right mindset for the right time and building a company that can learn and adapt through change. In this podcast, Rebecca shares an insightful and concise overview of her Survive, Reset, Thrive framework, which I found to be a remarkably simple yet complete and pragmatic model for growth strategy. Why we should think of growth as a loop and not a line. How you embed continuous learning loops in your organization in which you test, gain insights, implement, share, and then iterate for improvement. Why uncertainty represents a great time to grow and how you can seize on that opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca Homkes. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here with us. I know that you live all over the world and you're traveling all over the world. Where are you joining us from today?
Oh, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm joining you from a very wet, a very dreary London, England today.
Oh gosh. Well, I know you also have a place here in Miami, so hopefully you'll get
Yes, I'll be in the Miami sun soon, so we can struggle through. Yes.
Okay, all right, we'll make it through. I'm going to open up with the same two questions that I always ask, which is, if you can complete this sentence for me. If you really know me, you know that.
If you really know me, you know that I am passionate about growth strategy and doing what I do. I fell into something that I got to do what I love. And I'm not saying that with anything else but the absolute truth. Everyone who knows me knows I'm doing exactly that. As a side, though, you also know I am very passionate about all sports, but especially performance sports, especially American football, which I've spent almost 20 years convincing my British colleagues and friends is the true sport to watch. And I'm also a big secret Formula One fan. I was lucky enough to work with Mercedes Formula One for a couple of years, and I fell into a deep passion for that as well.
That is amazing. Yeah, my wife saw the Netflix series about Formula One, and then she has fallen in love with it. And since it's come to Miami, we've been going ever since. And yeah, it's interesting. So like, there's engineering, there's strategy, there's team, there's funding.
There's corporate strategy involved in all sports as well, besides the actual action that happens on the field. So there's super cool stuff to geek out into in all of these sports.
Yes, right. You can find depending on your interest, you can find a different avenue. Great. All right. So you are interested, I assume? I mean, obviously you've said in strategy. What is your definition of strategy?
I think the coolest thing about the definition of strategy is the last couple of years, especially, we're having all these conversations about everything's changed, new normal, paradigm shift, everything's different. What's really cool is strategy hasn't changed. The definition of strategy remains value creation. Strategy was, is, and will always be about delivering value creation. and the definition of value creation is driving the biggest gap possible between your customer consumer willingness to pay and your total cost of delivering that value. So strategy, value creation, moving those two critical needles apart.
Awesome. I love it. So if strategy is about value creation, just if you don't mind, just lay out the framework. I wouldn't say a student of, it's too complicated, but I have written about and I use the OODA loop a lot, John Boyd's OODA loop. I love the idea of the cycle. And I love the way that you've captured, and it is different than the OODA loop. So just like, if you don't mind, just like describe your survive, reset, thrive framework and just maybe one sentence each. What does each mean?
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks so much. So survive, reset, thrive is, the best way to describe it is a pragmatic and proactive model of how to grow through any market condition. And you've got to start with the premise that growth is a loop, not a line, which can sound a bit cliche, but unfortunately, most of our strategy planning tools are based on linear checklists or frameworks, step one, then step two, then step three. And that's not the dynamic and complex world we're living in. And so I'm encouraging strategy experts, whether you're an internal CSO or you're running your own company, to embrace this loop thinking. And everything in growth, you're going through this loop of survive. There will be shocks, which could be market shocks, like a recession or a COVID or a surprise election. It could be an internal shock, like you lose a major investor or you lose a major customer. So you've got to stabilize the business. You reset because the situation's changed. So you've got to change, which means challenging all of your critical assumptions. Then you can go back to being a thriving organization again. But you are going to be going through this 3-mode loop. There's no perfect timing to stay in each. There's no way you can stay and thrive forever, which is a classic question the entrepreneurs ask me. You're going through this loop. And I think the biggest challenge of the 3-part loop is no organization goes through it at the same pace. So you're going to have different business units in different geographies at different stages. And that can make our role as the internal strategy consultant or head of strategy very difficult because we are, responsible for doing these processes and plans to get everything in sync at the same time. But you're almost always going to have some units who need survive time and some who need thrive and some who need reset. And I kind of liken it to having 2 or 3 kids as a parent, and they each need a different parenting style to thrive. And it's the same on this. And so we need to actually embrace a bit of agility in how we approach the strategy process as well, to embrace where different units are across these 3 modes.
Fascinating. I mean, so many questions that come off of that. It sort of reminds me a little bit. We had Mike Tushman on, and his ambidextrous organizations. That at the very top, you have to have that leadership that can go between the 2 modes. But it sounds like you're saying those modes. I guess what I'm hearing is those are dynamic. Like different parts of the organization they don't just stick in one mode.
They don't stick in one mode, and unfortunately, a lot of our processes are about age of the organization or size. So you need process A if you're up to 10 million, process B for 10 to 100, process 3 from 100 to a billion. And there's a bit of truth to that, but the differences in modes really falls apart pretty quickly after 10 million. And then there's very little difference to several billion, if I'm honest, having been doing this for a very long time. But no matter what size or age you are, you're going to go through this. And the biggest trap is doing the same thing every year and never doing that forced reset sometimes, or rushing a survive phase when you probably need as a unit to stay in there for an extra 6 months. And we're forcing units in or out of things because of our corporate planning process sometimes.
So I'd love to get into, you have some very specific suggestions and ideas, around managing the corporate strategy conversation. But I just want to pull one thing out for the readers that I really appreciate about reading and listening to your stuff. This loop versus the linear. Okay. So like a company is entering a new market and they kind of have a playbook because they've done it before. And kind of the linear model would be execute the playbook. How is the loop metaphor? What does the loop metaphor tell you to do differently?
Well, there's, the survive, reset, thrive loop, but kind of the critical underlying loop, if we're going to have a loop within a loop here, so brace yourself, is those learning loops, right? Is learning loops are these repetitive, critical, cyclical processes of growth. So more simply, as we're doing anything in growth, you're going through a loop of execute, insight, embed. Like you execute something in the market, you get an insight, you embed it in the organization. Then the next time you execute, you should do it better. And so if I'm opening a new market, I'm launching a new product, I'm onboarding a new supplier, I'm actually going through this learning loop of execute, insight, embed. And if we fall too much in this is the checklist, this is what we do, here's what actually accidentally happens. I'm heads down to new insights or new learning because I'm trying to stick to the plan or follow the process. And look, we need to stick to plans and processes, for governance aspects, but it misses that insight. And here's the second thing I've changed. Execute is the first step. The traditional strategy process is analyze, 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 make decision, approve decision, sit on decision, approve decision a second time, and then finally start executing. And we need to embrace this execute to get the learning, get the insight, embed the insight, and do it better again next time. Is our world is changing at a pace, right? That old linear cycle of making decisions is going to be competitive disadvantage.
Right. Yeah. No, again, each time you speak, you're popping a whole bunch of things. I'm kind of thinking of that. Yeah, you have that learning loop, the OODA loop, you have the agile loop. But talk to us about this need to have parallel paths. Because what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's not a question of we plan and then we switch to execution. We're doing both and we're doing one for the other. So
You are. Yeah, you are. And a little bit of that, there's a couple different places where that comes in. But, business schools traditionally have separated strategy and execution, and then they separate leadership and culture too. Like these are really things that live separately in organizations. And strategy and execution live together. Any cliche about which one's more important than the other is a waste of our time, right? They only live excellently when they live together, right? So the strategy you are achieving is the strategy you are executing. And let me put it simply. I'm wondering if we should stop calling them the strategic plans or the strategic planning process. I'm reframing it. I'm dropping the word plan. Let me tell you why. Because there's something about the word plan that frames our brain, everything in this must get done, right? This is what we must do. And as soon as we call it the strategic plan, we are now focused on getting plan done. And I want people heads up, not heads down, and acknowledging the plan is a hypothesis. It's hopefully a great hypothesis based on all the learnings we had at the time of development. But these hypotheses are going to get proven and disproven as we're executing. And I need a system in the organization that's going to be willing to adjust it and update it as we learn. And what you're doing in this parallel pathing, if we make it more specific for the listeners, is you made this set of beliefs, right, as you've developed the strategy. Now you're executing the strategy, but the ultimate parallel path is I'm testing my beliefs in the market while I am executing my strategy. And as my beliefs get affirmed or proven, I'm actually incrementally resourcing and doubling down on that priority, right? And as my beliefs get unproven or disproven, or I have the critical pathway off, I might pause or stop that priority. And these micro shifts that organizations make, that's the true power of agility. We over romanticize these big strategic pivots. Company was doing X and now they're doing Y. Empirically, those are few, and empirically, a lot of them don't work, right? The true power of agility is these micro shifts and adjustment. As external eyes, we often can't see. That's the parallel pathing. I'm executing while I'm testing. I'm bringing the learnings in. I'm adjusting. I'm pausing. I'm doubling down. I'm adding. And that's what we need to embrace in the process as well, which is why I think strategic planning isn't framing us to do what we need to do for our organizations.
So I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I'm kind of thinking that there are probably, you probably have some kind of schema of types of beliefs. I think that there are some types of beliefs that are like cultural beliefs. This is the customer's always right. There's beliefs that we don't know. I think like Rita McGrath and Discovery Driven Planning, our strategy depends on the customer adoption rate, but we don't know if it's going to be 5% or 50%. So let's look that. There's beliefs that you kind of like, you're betting on, but you might be wrong. And then there are things that you just, that you're really betting on. Do you have like a kind of a help people like think about?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, beliefs are not religious dogmas, right? You start with your beliefs from the macro trends. And that's, what's stuff going on macro, industry, economic, social, specific to you. There's also what I call value chain trends. So what are your critical beliefs based on how you think you're best at R&D, your supply chain, your culture, your leadership? And then you set them, you call it the trends, but most strategies have a bunch, call out the trends, have pages and pages of the trends, but more critical in the strategy is not the trend, it's your belief, like your stance. So think a trend is what you can see, but your belief is your stance of how that's going to move going forward. And then you've got some critical assumptions. And the best way to simplify it is what has to be true for this to be a great idea. So I start with the beliefs. Then you kind of work through the strategy, but then before you really move forward into execution, you've got your beliefs, but you also have your set of critical assumptions.
One example of what has to be true, just help us visualize.
Yeah, let's take kind of the ESG agenda, right? So if you're progressing with anything around carbon reduction, or I'm working with a great, cool company trying to take carbon capture out of concrete, they've got some critical assumptions about how quickly governments move, like what governments are willing to subsidize, how much customers actually care versus say that they care. And we've captured those, assumptions based, again, by their political aspects, by the customer aspects, by the consumer aspects. And, there's many, but you can really capture in probably 6 or 7 core assumptions. And now I'm testing those. And I'm testing those. And as long as they're roughly right, but, maybe not tracking, I'm still going. As they start accelerating, I start accelerating. And again, just go back to the question, what has to be true for this to be a great idea? Those are your most critical assumptions. And that's where you start parallel pathing in that testing process. And here's how you practically, though, let me add one thing, is you need to add a tracker to your strategy. You've got your strategy tracker, but you need to make a belief tracker. So your belief tracker is based on the critical beliefs that are baked into assumptions baked into our strategy. You're tracking those beliefs separately, now related, but separately. And here's the fun thing. You want your belief tracker to be off track sometimes. Because if I look at a team's belief tracker and it's all green, my instant assumption is not this team is a genius and they predict the world wonderfully. My instant assumption is, I bet we weren't clear enough on our beliefs to get any feedback on whether or not they're proving or not. So a bit of orange and a bit of gray is actually good because that means we were clear enough. I can actually test these in the market.
All right, I'm just making kind of a little mental leap here. We had Amy Edmondson on, psychological safety, and she looked at, nursing teams that actually had more reds. Mm-hmm. Is that related to what you're describing?
It's related to the notion of embracing the learning loop, what she calls the learning mopenin. She does a great job of defining the different types of learning that you're supposed to be doing, right? It's an excellent book for those who haven't read it yet. I'm assuming all of your listeners have. And so that's kind of embracing the notion that, going back to what we said, our strategy is hypothesis, right? And we're going to be testing these hypotheses, and it's okay to pause or change some of the things along the way as these hypotheses are proven or disproven, which means we will need to resource testing, not just resource executing for results. And that's another shift that we want to make if we really want to embrace this pathway to thrive.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like being honest with ourselves that we don't know, or we're learning things that are inconsistent with what we believed.
Exactly. And there's ways to do it well, right? The immature way to do it, let's take AI. And I'm hearing this a lot over the last couple of months is, to make a belief like AI is going to be a really big deal, but we can't predict what's going to happen, so we need to watch it. We didn't do anything in our strategy by saying that. So saying that and then not putting in the strategy and doing nothing differently, we're not doing anything. But making some pretty core beliefs about how quickly it's going to move on a macro level, an industry level, an internal productivity level, and then testing those along the way. Now you're kind of embracing some of this mentality.
Gotcha. So let's dig a little bit more into that, because I love how you approach this idea of trends and how we relate to trends, and the idea of like trying to predict where AI will be in 3 months and what it will do.
It's a fool's errand. It's a fool's errand, right? Yeah.
So what do we do? Do we just wait to see what other people will do and then we act, but then we're too late? How do we?
Yeah, this is, of course, it's one of those that 2-word, it depends answer, right? But here's first what I like to do is making a belief about AI is frankly a waste of time, right? You're saying nothing. So I ask teams to break it down into 4 types. Your macro view of AI, I'll come back to what that is. The industry, internal needle up, if I go back to strategy, so increasing customer willingness to pay, internal needle down. So you've got 4 beliefs you've got to make. Think about macro. Here, it's a good example is the movement from search to ask. As we move it from searching in Google to asking GPT, if you're a B2C business, and frankly, some B2B businesses, that might affect your customer acquisition. If you're a brand-based business, this really changes things for you, right? If I think of some of my great brands, like let's take WD-40, that blue and yellow can. Right now, if you and I go to Google or YouTube and put in fix a squeaky door, it's going to return millions of videos of people fixing squeaky doors with a blue and yellow can. But if you go to your GPT of choice, we won't name any names here, right? And put in, how do I fix a squeaky door? It's going to tell you to use a lubricant, right? And that's one company. So that's a macro. Industry, it changes ability to enter, ability to exit, consolidation, fragmentation. And then, of course, needle up, needle down. So make a belief on all of those. Then you can start testing them. You're not trying to predict the future. You're taking a stance so you can start moving. Sometimes our bigger companies are going to move to actively shape. If you've got a critical belief that has to be true, go into a shaping stance. Often we're just in learning stance. And yes, of course, it is sometimes appropriate to be in an active waiting stance.
So what do you do with a leadership, or what does a chief strategy officer, chief innovation officer do when leadership says, let's just wait and think through the decision more. Let's see what's happening. Are we making the right decision? We're not in execution. How do you react to that?
There are times when purposely waiting is the right response. And my challenge is if you're in a waiting stance, right, you should be waiting because you are very purposely watching for one or two beliefs to be proven. If we're not even clear enough to know what our beliefs are, right, we need to do work there before we go into that. I find it very difficult to ever argue we shouldn't be utilizing the learning stance, what I call acting to learn. So I'm taking purposeful action in the market, not to get results today, but to get the insights I need for results tomorrow, right? And so if you think about at its simplest in strategy, we can wait or we can act. And we can wait because we're analyzing, we can wait because we're watching, or we can be wait purposely wanting to move in number two. Or we can act for results, the classic strategy one. We can act to shape or we can act to learn. And if your corporate strategy process is using two of those six stances, wait and analyze, act for results, you are leaving all of these options on the table that other people in the market are using. So waiting is okay if it's very purposeful, but I want you using some of those acting stances too. If it's premature to act for results, you should be acting to learn.
I think that people can kind of get their heads around this taking action in order to learn in that space of like human-centered design, new product design. But what I love about you talk about applying that across like the entire other areas of the business model.
Yeah, and there's one aspect, of course, just articulating your beliefs, testing your beliefs, but more fundamental, and you can do it pre and post setting your top priorities. But let's talk post because it's easier for listeners to grasp onto. Once you've got your top priorities, I go through each of them and say, where are my critical learning loops? So within each of the top priorities, where are the two or three loops that we need to accelerate our learning? It could be onboarding a new supplier. If it could be kind of sustainability scoping for suppliers, it could be opening a new market. It could be rolling out a new internal IT system like an ERP launch or something along those lines. It could be, one of my critical HR metrics, days to value creation. So you identify what these kind of few ones are, map out, okay, here's the 6 or 7 steps, right, that we have right now. And what your goal is to say, hey, in this loop, let's take onboarding a new supplier. There's 10 steps right now. How can I, make it go eliminate the friction and go faster through them? And then those learnings will embed and evolve into my next stage of the priority. So simple, identify your learning loops. Those critical, repeatable activities for growth. I'm going to define it again. Sorry, I'm a big repeater. Your learning loops are those critical, repeatable activities for growth. Those are what your goal always is. And, sometimes I think corporate strategy processes, they stop at the top priorities and then move to tracking. And it's a huge miss because you've got all of those insights from the discussions, from the vetting, from the scenario planning, and you just chunk everything into a tracker and start executing. It's like, why aren't we doing a better job of linking the insights from the discussion into the execution besides just tracking the priorities? And learning loops is a great place to do that.
Fascinating. Yeah, and I've heard you say something before, but kind of the distinction between learning and teaching. And I kind of what I'm hearing is sort of if you maybe talk to us about that, because there is this view. Hey, we've come up with our plan and we repeat our plan, our processes, operating manuals and things. So what's the difference between learning and what many companies do?
Let's give the big punchline. Okay. The number one differentiator in being a Thrive company, without question, not even close, is learning velocity. Organizations that learn faster, grow faster. It is that simple. But learning is hard because being a learning organization is not being a teaching organization. Almost all companies pride themselves on learning because they have an LMS system, they have a team dedicated to it. They send people to fabulous business schools, as of course they should keep going, right? As all of your guests would attest. But that's great, but that's incomplete, right? That's being a teaching organization. Being a learning organization is here's our priorities, and within them, here's the 3 learning loops we need to close. We're acknowledging our strategies, a set of hypotheses we're going to test and involve as we're executing. We are preparing our board and stakeholders, right? That we have a set of hypotheses. And hey, one of these priorities might not be there next year when we show you the first reset of our 3-year strategy because we are going to be more agile than others in the market. And it's a capability. Like growth is a capability and it is a choice you have to make whether or not you want to build that capability in your organization. And frankly, I don't want to call it laziness because people think they're doing the right thing. But hey, we just need to go into execution mode right now. When I hear that from an organization, I know growth is about to fall off the table, right? Because as soon as you go into that mode and you think you need to can stop building the capability of growth and learning, things are going to start slowing down really fast.
Gotcha. As you say, there are very few organizations that actually can grow for, over time. Somehow cities can keep growing and growing, and countries.
They are. But look, the cities that you probably look to had resets, right? Look at all of those cities. New York has gone through survive and resets many times. San Francisco, of course, is going through one right now. Our Miami, right? How many times it's gone? I mean, think about Miami in the 80s and 90s were very different in both of those decades than Miami in the early 2020s. So cities, yes, because cities always have this structure that they can get back to thrive easier than organizations, right? Because they have these populations who are rooting for them, which is a little bit different sometimes in shareholders than a public market. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, tell us a little bit more because also what I love about what you say is like it's not just about being triggered, seeing an internal external shift change, and then react quickly to that. It's more about that you're not in one of these states at all time at any given time. You're more kind of across all. Just bring that to life for us.
Yeah. So if we think about, there's 3 modes in the loop. There's a survive mode, right, where you're stabilizing the organization from an internal and external shock. There's the reset or change mode, and there's the thrive mode. Now, the thing about survive is no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to be there. But the first stage of survive is acknowledging you're in survive, which always sounds like a bad paraphrase, Fight Club reference, but you got to do that, right? But you know what the coolest survive is proactive survive, right? You're always setting the organization up to survive. And here's what most organizations do. We swing. When markets are frothy, interest rates are low, cash is flowing, we're spending, we're hiring, we're growing, we're building capability. And then when interest rates change, right, when cash stops flowing, when things feel tough, when our customer cancels a contract, we stop everything, we do layoffs, we freeze hiring, and think of it as a swinging, right? Which means we're actually not building capability in either. We're never really a great growth company. We're never actually really great at handling downturns. So these Thrive organizations have built steady state survive, which means I run lean, but not too lean. I've got the right fixed to variable cost ratio. I've got a strong balance sheet, but I'm not underinvesting in my priorities. I've got key moats around my customers that I'm never taking for granted. I prioritize engagement, knowing that it's strategic for my employees to be engaged. And then when shocks hit, they react less. That's one aspect for the power move. The other is, and I've been thinking about this a lot with AI over the last kind of 9 to 12 months, is sometimes you need to reset without survive. And this is a harder reset, right? Because you can be in thrive mode, as some companies are in some industries, and AI has actually changed the dynamics of industry competition quite quickly. They need to go into a forced reset and change some things in their strategy, what they're prioritizing and where they're spending, but they don't have that disciplining factor of going through a survive stage. Those are the hardest resets than the ones where the market says stop or don't stop. Like when we got a COVID or a recession or we lose a major customer, we know we've got to survive. And we pride ourselves in being in crisis mode. But there are some companies and industries that have to go into this forced reset, and we'll see whether or not they're able to.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh gosh, we're reaching the top of our time with you. I've got 15 questions, so I want to hear about the 3 C's. I want to hear about the 6 questions in a story. I want to hear all this, but let me just ask you the question that you being a McKinsey person, you probably know I'm going to ask is what didn't I ask? What's the one question that I could have asked that you didn't get to answer?
Let's just go to the recipe of Thrive and then the role that people can do to help organizations, right? So let's simplify Thrive because we didn't spend a lot of time there. Is the recipe for Thrive is quite simple. You need 3 things. And I'm going to say them. You're going to say, Rebecca, that's too simple. Let's say them, okay? You've got a strong balance sheet that you brought through from the survive phase. You have strategic insights from the reset phase, and then you execute with agility and learning. And 2 out of 3 is not good enough. You need all 3 at all times. Strong balance sheet, strategic insights, and execute with agility and learning. And here's how a corporate strategy director can help. We have lost the insights and strategy. This template-based strategy we are defaulting into is losing the insights. Sometimes I can't force the insights into the same framework every other business unit uses. We've got to bring the insights back into strategy and then embrace this executing with agility and learning, which means going back to I'm going to learn faster to grow faster and build that capability.
Love it. Okay. Again, we could spend an hour unpacking that, but instead we will ask people to definitely find your book, Survive, Reset, Thrive. There's also great content that you have online, and thank you for doing that for us. Where else should people go to connect with you?
Yeah, the best way to connect to me is go to surviveresetthrive.com. And you will find lots of videos, some tutorials on going through the 3 modes, lots of articles that I've written and have been published, and direct links to buy the book. You can also, of course, connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll get to see the constant flow of everything that's coming out. But yeah, just surviveresetthrive.com.
Well, thank you. I really think this book has 10 books in it. I love the way that you're able to simplify complex things and make it really actionable in memorable ways, and really provide that kind of bridge from the big idea and actually something tangible that we can do. So thank you so much for doing that and for taking some time to unpack it with us here.
It was my pleasure. We could have gone for hours, so we'll have to next time. Yes.
I know. Yes. Thank you.